So you may notice that the ottoman that is usually not here is here today. That is because when I went to move it, there was this giant ass spider sitting under it. And I was having none of that. So I decided to keep the ottoman and sit in a much more unusual position than I usually do. Sacrifices we make for pure arachnophobia. So as I'm making this video, Venice Film Festival is still underway. I believe there are 2 more days left. But all of the movies that I wanted to talk about and that I feel have genuine contention when the Academy Award nominations come around in January, those films I feel have been screened, and I think there's a good bit to talk about with those in particular. I have 3 that I want to mention and delve into, and then 1 from Telluride Film Festival that I'd like to briefly touch on towards the end. But they still have yet to screen the new Paul Greengrass film, but that doesn't have nearly enough backing or campaigning to really show up anywhere. They just screened The Sisters Brothers, which I don't think will be showing up. Suspiria, I don't think that'll be anywhere. So, like, they still have a couple to show that are coming in the next 2 days, but I don't think any that were really up for contention at any point. So I want to start with these 3 movies, and the first one I'd like to talk about is First Man. I think this is the very first film I talked about when it came to this award season, and I think that anybody with just sort of the most basic foundational understanding of the Oscars, or even if you're a very casual player, I guess, quote-unquote, when it comes to watching the award season, I think this is definitely one of those movies that you would look at and you would go, oh yeah, this one will definitely be up for some Oscars. It's directed by that guy who did La La Land, and it's a true story about the guy who landed on the moon. That's a lineup. I read the early reactions to this. I follow Slash Film, and they do this really nice thing where they compile a sizable amount of the first reaction tweets and little blurbs and paragraphs that different reviewers like The Guardian and Hollywood Reporter and IndieWire will write, and you can just kind of scroll through and read them all, and it's excellent. And the reviews for First Man, I tweeted about this, are far more stellar than I could have expected they'd be. Now, the Metascore, if you look at it in comparison to Damien Chazelle's other films, is slightly lower. But, you know, I didn't really expect this movie to have a 97 on Metascore. Nevertheless, the reviews for this movie are pretty damn incredible. I did not really see a negative mention of anything except for this ridiculous conservative horse shit that's going on with that they don't show him planting the flag. I don't know why anybody cares. I definitely think that these reviews have cemented First Man a spot in the Best Picture category. I kind of always thought that it would be there. I never really had much of a doubt that we would see it in Best Picture. I think that it just has enough attention, and I think that I think Damien Chazelle is going to, in a sense, almost start being treated a little bit like Christopher Nolan, where people are slowly recognizing his name because Whiplash has sort of garnered almost like a cult kind of following, even though it was so low budget at the time. And then La La Land obviously was huge when it came out, and so I think people are going to see the trailer to this movie, and they're going to see from the director of La La Land. I don't think it actually says that, but like they'll look it up, whatever. But I think this movie has a lot of backing audience-wise behind it, and I think, like Christopher Nolan, people are going to go start seeing Damien Chazelle's movies just because they're directed by Damien Chazelle. And I think that that'll be a big player. I think especially the Oscars are starting to prove they like, or at least they want to start awarding popular films. So I definitely think that it has that going for it for Best Picture. I think that Damien Chazelle has cemented himself a spot in Best Director with the discussion of the visual aesthetic of the film and how everything looks and how that completely complements everything, especially what I've heard about the space sequences. I think Damien Chazelle, they'll put him in there. I find it difficult to believe that they would give Damien Chazelle the Oscar for Best Director, then him becoming the youngest Best Director winner of all time, and then he has another movie come out that gets nominated for Best Picture, but he doesn't get put in Best Director. I have to believe that if they're going to put this movie in Best Picture, they're going to put him in Best Director, and I think both will happen. I think Josh Singer will take a screenplay nomination. I think that's adapted screenplay, and usually adapted is a little lighter. It looks to be, and that one actually might be a little more packed this year. You got a lot of movies based on books coming out, but I think First Man will be thrown in there. And then you have to look at performances and wonder. I think the performance I saw the most acclaim for was Claire Foy. If I had to make a prediction, I would say Claire Foy and Ryan Gosling would both be nominated. Maybe a little less sure on Ryan Gosling, just because there was like slightly less praise, and if Claire Foy kind of steals the reins, then I think maybe she could almost take all of the attention, like how Gary Oldman took all the attention away from Kristen Scott Thomas in Darkest Hour. But I also find it hard to believe that the movie's called First Man, it's about Neil Armstrong, it'll be in Best Picture, it'll be in Best Director and Best Screenplay, and then he won't be nominated. So if I were to make a prediction, I would put both of them in. I guess one of the biggest questions with Claire Foy, I'm sure this question is answered, I'm not 100% sure on it. It's the same thing with Amy Adams for Backseat. I don't know if they're being campaigned for lead actress or supporting actress, but I think both are relatively, they both have space for Claire Foy. I think that no matter how she campaigns, I think she'll get in. But what's interesting to me is I think that this movie, what could ultimately propel it forward when you're looking at possible wins for it, is the technical element of it. What I saw a lot of praise for in these reviews is the visual effects and the sound design and just the overall technical elements of the film seem to be being heavily regarded. So if we're looking at something that's like a Gravity, right, that arguably gives it more of a chance with the Big Six, I think, because it just draws that much more attention to it. When you look at something like Gravity, it took all of the technical awards. I don't like Gravity, but I think it deserved all of the technical awards. And ultimately, I think that's what lent it Best Director, was he had to work within this confined space. Pretty much everything is shot in front of a green screen, and he had to understand where the visual effects were going to be placed, and I think that makes it all the more impressive to a lot of people. And I think that could arguably be the same situation when it comes to Damien Chazelle. If I don't think he'll win Best Director, I think that would be kind of unusual. But if there's anything giving him a little more possibility in terms of that win, I think it's the technical aspects of this film, and they're now strong contention to win. I actually realized I have one other movie that I want to talk about really quick. I'm not gonna talk about this a ton, and that's Roma, which I talked about in the last Oscar contention video. My biggest point against Roma in the last video was that was Netflix, and how I think that slowly but surely the Academy is growing more lenient towards Netflix. I did have a misspeak in my last video. I said that Mudbound wasn't nominated for any of the Big Six, and it was nominated for Adapted Screenplay, but I would like to argue that Adapted Screenplay last year was very loose. Original was the really tight one. Adapted Screenplay, I mean, Call Me By Your Name had run away with that award back in August, and they threw Logan in there, and I don't know, I thought that category was not as tight, so I don't think it was as hard for Mudbound to squeak in there, but it did, so I'm mistaken. But what makes me more confident now in Roma, more than I was before, at least in getting nominations. I don't know if I'll say anything about wins. It almost seems a little almost too artsy for wins. I know that sounds crazy to say, but I'll probably dive into that more once I actually see the movie, because I could be wrong. There are two things that really make me believe that this has a better chance than I did in the last video that I made. The first is the reviews, which are stellar. They're arguably the best that have come out of Venice Film Festival. I think it's rocking like a 95 on Metascore. I really haven't seen anything against it. I've seen the word masterpiece thrown around a couple of times, which is a very strong word to throw out. So, you know, if that's all true, maybe you do really have a strong contender. I think it'll definitely show up in Best Picture now, especially if they're going to be throwing 10 in there, or they can still throw a max of 10 in there. But what else, the other thing that gives me hope is Alfonso Cuarón basically promising people that it will show up in theaters. I don't know if that means it's going to be a wide release like every other movie that comes out, or if that means it's going to get a limited theatrical release. But the fact that it will hit theaters in some way, shape, or form gives me a little bit more confidence in it, because there's just something about it's only coming out on this one service. It's streaming. You have to go to Netflix to watch it. I feel like that only hurts a movie's chances of Oscar contention, and I think that's what Amazon does so well, is when they produce films, they release it everywhere, as well as on Amazon and on Amazon Prime. You look at The Big Sick, you look at Manchester by the Sea, you got Beautiful Boy coming out this year. So I think Netflix is starting to notice that. They're starting to address that, and I think they're going to start releasing their movies in theaters, which I think is very good news for The Irishman, which still doesn't really have a set release date to my knowledge, so I don't think it'll come out in time for this award season, maybe next year's, which I believe is also a Netflix film, but if they're starting to give their movies theatrical releases, I think that's good news for them in terms of awards, and then I think people will turn their heads towards Netflix a little more, because they're like, hey, they did that movie that was nominated for Best Picture. So I think Roma has a much better shot with it being nominated in with it getting a theatrical release, and especially with the reviews it's getting. I think it'll be difficult for the Academy to turn its head away from it. The third movie I want to talk about is A Star is Born. I had said with this movie that I almost found it impossible to predict what we'd see from it in terms of awards until others had seen it, because there was no real way to judge it yet. It was Bradley Cooper's directorial debut. It was like the 4th remake of the same story, so it's hard to judge, and it's Lady Gaga's like pretty much film breakout role. I know she was in American Horror Story, but it's the first time she's really playing a main role in a movie. And the reviews are exactly what it needed in order to be up for the contention that everybody thought it would be. So I think that it has also cemented itself into some solid running. There's nothing yet that I've seen like Battle of the Sexes last year where I was like, okay, well, these reviews have kind of almost knocked it out of contention. Everything that I've seen review-wise, I think, has only supported these movies. But A Star is Born, in the reviews that I read, there were two common denominators that I was seeing in these reviews. The first was Bradley Cooper's direction, not necessarily his performance. I heard good things about his performance, but I think lead actor is sort of a tight category this year, just because of how many movies are coming out. And I'll talk about that a little later with the 5th movie I'm going to talk about, but I think that category is a little tighter. They haven't nominated Bradley Cooper for an Oscar for lead actor since 2014, I think, with American Sniper. This fucking spider shit is really freaking me out. If this thing crawls up under the chair, I'm going to freak out. But I think it's definitely a possibility for him to take a Best Director nomination. I think they would love to put a actor that has been respected by them for a good couple of years. I think they're going to love to see him direct quite possibly one of the best movies of the year, and one that might be a front runner in other categories. So I think they'll definitely put him in Best Director. And then Lady Gaga is obviously the other one that people are talking about. She's in every review acclaimed for her performance. I would argue she is sort of a front runner to win at the moment. Like I said in my last video, they love to give people who are not actors that put on a good performance and nobody suspects it. They like to give them Oscars. They like to give, like Jennifer Hudson, Cher, even Halle Berry, who was a model, won for Monsters Ball, or Monster Ball, or Ball of Monsters. I don't know, I haven't seen it. But I think that that'll be a similar case, and I would not be surprised at all if she won. There are a lot of front runners for lead actress. Like I said, I think it also depends where you put Claire Foy. I think it depends where you put Amy Adams. I've heard Amy Adams going to supporting, and I'm a pretty strong supporter of Amy Adams and her possibilities this year. But then you also have Viola Davis for Widows, which will be screening at TIFF, and that'll be a big tell as to whether or not that movie has the strong contention that I think everyone believes it will. And then you've also got Glenn Close for The Wife, which I did finally get around to seeing, by the way. Solid movie, 7 out of 10 movie. The writing isn't very good, but Glenn Close is pretty fantastic. I think she'll be nominated. I do not think that she will win at all. I think that she'll kind of wither out of talk enough. I think she'll stay in it enough to be nominated, but she will not. The performance is not, it doesn't just wow you enough to stick around that many months and then win. That's my 2 cents on that. Maybe I'll do a full review on that. Anyway, I think Lady Gaga has a pretty strong chance of being, well, I think she'll definitely be nominated, and I think she has a very strong chance of winning. I think also you look at the fact that people still talk about the fact that they think she was snubbed for that one song that she did back in 2015, which even I had not seen the movie. It was a documentary, to my recollection, but they gave it to that fucking, Writings on the Wall garbage from Spectre, the worst movie and the worst song, and I think people are still upset. And then when Sam Smith goes, I'm the first openly gay person to win this award, and everyone was like, no, Elton John won that in like 94 or 92, so that, you know, my point is, they might be looking to redeem themselves for that one, because people still talk about that one, I think. I mean, that's the song that brought Chris Pine to tears. That's that great meme. So, I think Lady Gaga is a solid frontrunner, and I think these reviews have done nothing but support that concept. Fourth movie I want to talk about is The Favorite. I don't have that much to say about this movie, but I believe this is now a very strong contender in most categories, at the very least to be nominated. The reviews for this movie are better than I had anticipated they would be. I expected, it's pretty good. I've seen, it's immense, it's fantastic, it's excellent, it's Yorgos' best movie. Now, that being said, you have to have a very selective taste to enjoy his other two American-made films, but this one definitely appeals more to the Academy, like I said, with the subject matter, the fact that the style is a little bit different than something like Mary Queen of Scots, which is coming out in December. I think this movie, in how unique Yorgos is as a director, will stand out more among that movie, because it's just going to have that impact of, this is unique, this is different, this is unlike things you've seen. And then you're going to have Mary Queen of Scots come out. People are going to be like, hey, we've seen movies like this before, but remember when The Favorite came out and did a completely different spin on that? And the reviews look to be also showing that that's what this movie highlights. That is also another really big bug. I really want to wrap this up and leave, is what I want to do. I'm going to move, actually. I'm going to come over fucking here. You're going to see a whole new side of life right now. You're going to see a whole new side of the set. Does this work? Yeah, this will be fun. We'll do this. I didn't care for that other shit at all. So I think that you can definitely look to see it in Best Picture. Best Director, I think, is a possibility, but just because of how tight that category is, I think we'll have to wait and see on a couple of others. I'd like to see how BlacKkKlansman continues in these next couple of months, how Widows opens, things like that. And then also, I think they're going to be looking to put a female director in there, and I know there's a movie being directed by a woman that's in talks right now, but the name is not coming to mind. So, we'll see on that one. But I think that, I mean, you've got a movie like this that has 3 leading women. I know Olivia Colman, I think they're pushing for lead, and I think she'll definitely get a nomination, but then I'd like to wonder if it comes down between Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone, who gets it. Nomination-wise, I would lean towards Emma Stone a little bit more, just because she's in more recent memory with the Oscars. They're both Oscar winners, but Rachel Weisz won back in 2009, and Emma Stone won in 2016. So I think Emma Stone is kind of young blood for them. She's almost like a Jennifer Lawrence in a sense, where I think they might want to just kind of keep throwing nominations at her as much as they can. But I think it'll also depend on the movie itself and who steals the show more, and who has the better character dynamic with Olivia Colman. I think that'll sort of work to dictate that. But I think, you know, you also got that movie in a bunch of other categories. You got it in costume design, you got it in makeup and hairstyling, you got it in production design, you probably have it in cinematography. So that's definitely a movie to look out for if you want to see it. I think that comes out on Thanksgiving, and I can't wait for it. So I would be sure to check that one out. The last one I want to talk about very, 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 very briefly is The Frontrunner, which is the new Hugh Jackman film, the biopic. It's Jason Reitman, I believe is his name. The guy who did Tully and then Juno and that stuff. He plays Gary Hart. I know little about the actual story. I know the very foundation. I know what the movie's about, and I kind of remember it. Or at least I remember hearing about it. But what's interesting about this movie is that the reviews for it are mediocre. I've seen good, and I have seen it's fine. I never really thought the movie itself had much contention up against all of these other movies with bigger names and, you know, more campaigning and better release dates, arguably. But the talk for Hugh Jackman is pretty damn great. People are really talking him up, because it's hard for, like, the nicest guy in Hollywood to play a really despicable person. And I think that if this movie comes out and the studio really gets behind Hugh Jackman, if they're smart enough to not get behind the movie as much, but to get behind Hugh Jackman a little more, I think he'll have a pretty good shot at being nominated. I don't think he has a chance in the world of winning, but I think there's a possibility he could sneak in there for a nomination, and I just love me some Hugh Jackman, so I'd be down with that. But that is it for my Venice Film Festival recap. Other than that, you know, I've heard Suspiria. I've heard mixed things about Suspiria, but I had anticipated that. I think that's going to be a very hit-or-miss movie for people kind of like Mother. I'm looking forward to hearing about 22 July, and then I really want to see The Sisters Brothers. But that is my recap for Venice Film Festival and what I think it does for Oscar contention. Like I said, I think it's only helped these movies. I think TIFF will sort of shut out a few more than this did, because TIFF is a little wider. I think Venice is a little more selective in terms of what it puts up for competition. I don't even think A Star is Born is up to win. I don't think it can win. I don't know if it's in competition. I might be wrong on that, though. But I'm looking forward to TIFF. They're showing a lot at TIFF. Widows is the big one that I'm very excited to see reviews for, because if that tanks, if that movie ends up sucking, then I think that's an open spot in a lot of categories that I would put Widows in right now. So stick around for that. I look forward to making that video. I start school tomorrow, so I'm going to keep trying to make these videos, but I'm in the year where I'm applying to college, and there's lots to be done, so keep an eye out for these videos. I'm going to keep doing reviews of the Oscar movies that I get around to seeing. We all know that September is slow, right? We've all learned. If there's anything I want people to take away from my channel, it's that if you're released in September, you're fucked. Which is why Robert Redford probably won't be nominated for The Old Man and the Gun. That's his fault for releasing his fucking movie in September. Sorry, buddy.